Kia rana tātou katoa, whakalowhalahi atu. And warmest Pacific greetings to you all. Me taki maata Ake, Nicholas, and Uncle Inu, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, your personal story with us. Me taki. My name is Jemima Tiatia Siao, Pro Vice Chancellor Pacific for the University of Auckland, and also a fellow professor in Pacific Studies along with Yvonne. I want to acknowledge first the ano, or manga whaua, of a very special woman who you've shared with us. A very special person. So, me taki maata and whakawailahi for sharing her with us. I acknowledge our Dean of Arts, Professor Greg Booth, here in the Fale tonight. Thank you for your support. And Her Excellency Miss Kairangi Samuela, me taki maata for making the trip and gracing us in the Fale tonight. And so, Yvonne, te rukirangi o Tangaroa Underhill-Sem. It is such a privilege and an honour to be able to MC this event and introduce someone who has been very special in my career and personally as well. When I was doing my postdoctoral studies and in climate change, actually, years and years ago, well, not that far, but years ago, I saw Yvonne. I looked her up. I didn't even know who she was, really. I looked her up and I thought, wow, such an impressive profile on our website. You should check it out. It's lengthy. And I thought, I really want to meet this woman. And from there, we've just really gelled. And she opened doors for me. She let ladders down. And she has continued to be a pillar in my own career. And just a really good friend and someone whom I can bounce off now and then and vent to. So me taki maata whakawailahi, Yvonne, for everything that you've been in my life and for our students. There was also a time when I was the co-head of school of Te Wānanga Waipapa, the School of Māori Studies and Pacific Studies, and you know, you get pulled in so many directions, and Yvonne was a rock. Yvonne was someone who would just slide in, no complaints, well, to my face, would just slide in and just, you know, she'll just take over. And once again, in the transition from our previous co-head of school and into our new co-head of school, who'll be joining us sometime, Yvonne is there. She is the backbone of Pacific Studies. So thank you for all that you are and for both our students and our staff. And so without any further ado, because I can see the nerves kicking in, I want to introduce you to come and present the Melia Effect, practicing audacity with obligation.
Kia rana, kia tātou katoa, whakalowhalahi atu, talofa, aloha, Māori, lukum yuogeta, maloa lelei, kia ora and welcome. First, I really want to acknowledge all those who've recently passed, and there are always some, and I want to especially acknowledge my cousin Frances Hartnell. And while the passing of my parents, Jasmine and Jack, and my brother David is more distant, nonetheless, their loss is also deeply felt, and I want to acknowledge them. Secondly, I acknowledge Ngāti Whātua, whose generosity amongst many struggles allows us to stand here on their lands. And I didn't realise that I had any right to be able to say that, but I do acknowledge that. Me taki ake for your fabulous demonstration of linguistic comfort in these lands and in our lands in Mauke and beyond. It's really something admirable and very special. Uncle Inu, thank you for your response. Once again, like my grandfather, he asked us to step up, and I'm really grateful for your words and representing my family. To my family, my sister, my cousins, my nieces and nephews, who've travelled from Wairoa and from Wellington and also from Suva, and my loyal friends who are here as well. You feed me in so many ways, and I want to welcome you to this beautiful Fale Pasifika at the University of Auckland. Special welcome to Her Excellency Kairangi Samuela, Cook Islands High Commissioner to New Zealand, and also a long-time feminist friend who shares a history from Mauke as well. Professor Greg Booth, I'm looking for your hat, but you might have taken it off. Just acknowledging Professor who is leading us through quite a moment as we go into a new faculty. To my colleagues, thank you for making the effort to come here in your busy schedules. I'm touched, really, that you've come to this evening when I know that time is preciously spread between family and friends, as well as teaching, research, writing, and making the Academy a place that we can all thrive in. And so I thank you all for the mundane and the extraordinary. It all matters. To the students I've had the pleasure of learning with, some of whom are here, so proud of the ways in which they're making a difference in amazing places around the world and especially in the Pacific. Thank you. To those who send their apologies, there is also another professorial happening in this university. Professor Karen Fisher, who's also a feminist Indigenous geographer, is having her professorial up in the science faculty. So it's amazing that there are two of us who are doing this. And our times are exactly the same. Finally, my kids, Kaita, who's come from Fiji, and my daughter Lana, who can't join us. She has a little one, a 3-week-old, and my son Arus. You're my greatest achievement, and just want to acknowledge that. I mean, it is a huge honour to be standing here in this beautiful building and sharing what I've done over the last 3 decades. I don't look that old, but I am more than 3 decades old. And I hope it goes some way towards honouring the position of a professor at the University of Auckland as another woman with a proud heritage from Ngāputoru, Mauke, Mitiaro and Atu, from Mangaia, from Alofi, from Germany and Aotearoa, and proud connections to Papua New Guinea. Let this professorial lecture not be such a rare occasion in the coming decades. Education really was one of the biggest gifts our parents gave to me and my siblings. But how to use this critically to contribute to challenging and changing injustices is something I learned from struggles. My own to some extent, but more importantly, those whose bodies and voices were overlooked and often silenced. So you've heard a little bit about me, so I will just say a little bit more. I was born in Rarotonga, the third daughter of 6 children to Jasmine and Jack Underhill. And as you've heard from Inu, I have a heritage that includes Mauke, Mitiaro, Niue, and also, as you heard from Inu, my grandfather was born in Papua New Guinea as the son of a missionary. My grandmother was born in Mauke. Her father was from Germany, and her mother was from Ngāputoru. And my dad was the youngest of 4, and I have a cousin on my dad's side here too. Some people say I leave out my dad's side. I never do, but she's here somewhere. Can't see her. There she is. My dad was the youngest born in Hamilton, and he spent fabulous childhood in Waimamuku near the Hokianga Harbour. His mother was born in Palmerston North as a first-generation New Zealander, and my grandfather was born in Masterton, also a first-generation New Zealander. I want to show you another slide, and it's just really some family snaps, so we can kind of get a little bit of a sense of where we're from. It's only one, and I hope you'll enjoy it, and apologies to my sister who shows up in 2 of them. So here's a couple of family snaps of particularly memorable moments. The first one I'll start off is growing up in Porirua in the 1960s, and there you can see us playing around on those wonderful hills. What do you call them? Washing machines with really bare number of houses in the background. This was Purirua, Cannons Creek, and we just had absolutely fabulous times growing up there. And, you know, Timaru, can you see your mum? She's the one climbing up the washing machine, and I'm the one that looks kind of demure and kind of good. That's why I picked it. It was not always like that. The next one is a really a memorable time was when our mother took myself and my two sisters, and you can see me there with lots of hair, and my two sisters, she took us back to Mauke at a moment where she thought she needed to go back. She'd been away from Mauke for 10 years and really wanted to know, can I go back to Mauke, can I live there? And so our family split, and my dad stayed at home with 3 boys, and my mum took us to Mauke. I was old enough in those days to absolutely feel that I was no different to anybody else, despite what I look like in there. And that has stayed with me for a very, very long time. The next photo has got 4 generations of, in Purirua in 1981. My grandfather, Inu's father, is there. My brother, David, in the middle, who died when he was 20, holding his son, Ben, and my dad. So that's a little story about how we did at a moment have 4 generations. Down the bottom, there's a fabulous photograph of my mum's 70th birthday, and it's memorable there because they were having so much fun with her siblings, but I wasn't there. I was living somewhere else, and I was feeling really, I missed out on such a wonderful event when they celebrated that, and so I just wanted to put that up there with some of my mum's brothers and sisters. You might notice it's not quite the same, but the tivaivais I have behind me are from my mum's collection. She would have made some of them. I can't say exactly which ones she's made here, but she became a taonga with tivaivai. The next 2 photographs are of my in-laws, Barb and Dad, as I know them, or in their Christian names, Sturgis and Anastasia Sem. And no matter what you do with your partner that you might marry, you never divorce your in-laws, is what I found. And so I still stay very close to my in-laws, to Barb, who's still alive at age of 94, and they were a very significant part of my life as well. And then, of course, my parents, Jasmine and Jack Underhill. And this photo was also taken at a time when I wasn't there. It was in 2001 when she was honoured with a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for the work she did in Purirua for a very long time. So I just wanted to give a sense that there is a person with some family and some pictures here as I begin to talk a little bit more about something else in here. Because what I want to do next is I'm hoping in the next 30 minutes I can explain a little bit about the Melia Effect, as I call it. And I'm going to mention some scholars and whose work and practice has inspired me, challenged me, and supported me. I can't mention all of my 50 master's students and 15 PhD students, but working with them has been a lifeline in the Academy. Again, though, this is a lifeline that would mean nothing without the breath that was given to me by my ancestors and the mātua and the aroha that underpins my family relations, and I want to really acknowledge that, beginning with my children and my siblings and cousins who are here, but all the way to my 3 moko, Māli, Paikea and Teneba o Te Rā. So, what does it mean, the Melia Effect? In 2012, my 20-year-old niece, Melia, experienced heavy menstrual flows throughout her last year at boarding school near Popondetta, Oro Province, Papua New Guinea. Towards the end of the year, as exams loomed, she felt ill. According to her mum, she was bleeding internally. According to her, she menstruated 3 weeks every month. She felt weak and she just collapsed. She was admitted to hospital, and in our last conversation, she asked if I would support her again so she could return to high school next year. She felt she might fail her exams because she'd been sick. 2 months later, back home, in the arms of her parents, Melia died. We tried retrospectively to diagnose the cause of Melia's death, from me here in Auckland and my sister-in-laws and her sisters in Papua New Guinea. We talked about the state of her young, apparently healthy, menstruating body. We wondered about the existence of sanguma, loosely translated as sorcery. We talked about why boarding schools didn't provide iron-rich food all year round for young menstruating women. We wondered, why did the health system allow her to return to her village, located far away from a health centre, and why some family members were silent about her condition. But let me tell you a bit more about the context. The reason a 20-year-old was still completing high school was because Melia had been prevented from completing high school in previous years due to the combination of two processes that led to devastating floods 2 years in a row. Plantation agriculture in the hinterlands of her boarding school that stripped away the original land cover, and unseasonably heavy rain linked to climate change and caused by an unprecedented rainfall in the water catchment above Melia's school. Amongst other things, the effect on Melia's school was that all the topsoil was washed away from the school grounds. This meant that the leafy, iron-rich vegetables students planted to supplement their diets did not grow. All students were affected by the shortage of nutritional food, but young, menstruating women were particularly affected. Melia was one of three in that year who died in the process of getting an education. And this context, sadly, is not unusual in the Pacific. So how do we respond to such tragedies? For me, I want to offer this notion of the Melia Effect to refer to the tragic outcomes for women and girls and all their diversities, which are interlinked. The gendered social relations, such as long-standing, rigid gender norms in families and communities. Education, health and justice systems that fail to recognise gendered bodies, let alone the markers of other bodily difference. Economic systems that treat people as disembodied consumers and labourers, and climate change, which compounds and impacts in disproportional ways. These are the intricate webs of connectivity that require intersectional thinking, a careful analysis of power, and bold, audacious responses. Understanding the Melia Effect, for me, meant thinking first very carefully about what I call the temporalities of existence. What does that mean? More simply, exploring how deeply time influences who we are, how we live, and how we relate to each other. This refers to both humans and other tangible and intangible things. It means we need to put more value on time frames. I've come a long way trying to understand this and to put it to tangible service. In my master's thesis, I mapped household mobility histories in Manihiki on the Northern Cook Islands. I became really fascinated by patterns of movement, and these are two households that show over time, and since 1960 to 1985 when I was there, who came and who went and what was happening at the time. But very quickly I learned that these timelines, as interesting as they were for me and how different they were completely ungendered and needed a lot more context. What was the demand for black pearls cultivated in Manihiki? How productive were gardens on the atoll soils? When was the MP in government? How did people in Manihiki live and relate to each other over those time periods that I drew on? These time frames, or these frames of time that we live with now and how they are gendered, became a real fascination for me, but it's quite esoteric. Except when you start to ask people and how people can recall the date of event, not because it's memorised, but because it's associated with other events. I always know my daughter's year, and I always know when the Fiji coups happened, because that was when my daughter was born, that year, that moment. And so it may seem like I really know Fiji history well, it's just that there was something special happening in my life and it coincided with that. So this way of thinking helped me to think about how well connected we are to understanding different frames of time in phrases like accelerated climate change, that's kind of like geological times, persistent political inertia, that's kind of like 2 or 3 political terms, or long ideological struggles, and that depends a lot on the ideology. But let me explain a little bit more about how this context became important in my work. I talk about a Pacific feminist understanding of ta, time, and va, space. And I use this to talk about how time affects bodies. Now, I've been trying to explain this over a long time in my publications, in conference presentations, and keynotes, and teaching, and around many tables. And so if I'm not explaining it clearly now, I just have to keep on doing it, I guess. And all those students who've sat in and tried to hear me talk about it, bear with me. I'm still learning about how to do that. So one of these pictures is of me trying to explain this in a paper called on Gender in Oceania. And the other one, which was more challenging, is in a negotiator, talking with negotiators, and Nani's knows the person in that, and she can be quite foreboding when she asks you a question. And so I'm there, I think you can recognise I'm the one in the white shawl, trying to explain to a negotiator on a really important issue what I'm talking about, what it meant. Many colleagues and other scholars have challenged me on the notion of being Pacific. I don't look Pacific. Of my being feminist. What about the men? Before I even get to notions of time and space, of ta and va. And that's really what I want to talk about. So let me try and explain how I got to where I am. It's required a lot of mobility. As early as my honours studies in Victoria University at Wellington, I was trying to understand the difference it made to one's identity growing up around Pacific people, as I did in Cannons Creek, Porirua, compared to, say, the more isolated families were in, say, Upper Hutt. Strangely, perhaps, I was inspired at Victoria University by Professor Harvey Franklin, who my good friend at the back there will know very well. His course on European peasantry, which revealed to me the deep historical process of capitalist exploitation. That was in a completely different time and space, but it had huge ripple effects, globally, including the Pacific. And he taught me the value of reading books, from cover to cover. He was also audacious enough to challenge New Zealand's myth of egalitarianism in New Zealand, and for that I was always very grateful. Mary K. Watson was the only woman geographer at Victoria University while I was there, and she extended a very timely handout to help me complete my application for an East-West Centre Master's Scholarship in Geography at the University of Hawaii, which rescued me from a sure career as a public servant following my father and demonstrates the value of even a little bit of a hand up. I was becoming more attuned to the ways in which different kinds of social relations of Cook Islanders emerged in different ways, but I was puzzled about how these were gendered. My dad gently advised me before I went to Hawaii to do my master's that I should not be too argumentative, based on many of the debates we had in our family, and by my increasing insistence that it was harder for women. This was at a time where abortions were illegal and homophobic slurs were regular in public. And I had a growing awareness of the ongoing contradictions that women were facing, publicly praised for being smart and beautiful, and privately often struggling to negotiate intimate partner relations. But in my master's, I turned to look at the diversity of mobility in remote parts of the Pacific and how family, cultural, and social relations stretched in response to that mobility. University of Hawaii and the East-West Centre expanded my knowledge in many ways, including performing as a poi-swinging, pareo-wearing, wannabe hula dancer Pacific Islander. Lifelong friendships were formed, and I had the fabulous opportunity to undertake research in manihiki on household mobility strategies, once I passed the demography exams, which I had to sit twice. Professor Murray Chapman's foundational work on mobility on the Weather Coast and Solomon Islands provided excellent food for thought. He also taught me the value of reading articles from start to finish, and regularly placed photocopies of articles in my box. And he would have been delighted to see his work in the 1970s in use during my recent research project on climate mobility in the Pacific. After a short stint as a researcher in the Justice Department in Wellington, I almost got pulled in again to being a civil servant. I departed to Papua New Guinea as a trailing spouse. These were fabulous, fertile times. My welcoming Wanigala Oro province family, my Wanigala Oro province family were welcoming. I was teaching English, demography and geography at the University of Papua New Guinea, and I had deep friendships with now Professor Betty Lovai, a research assistant Veronica Mungi, who taught me much more about being married into Highlands family systems, and Professor Graham Sem and other colleagues at the geography department, who more recently I've been able to connect with over the last couple of years. I was lucky enough to be able to travel around Papua New Guinea on student field trips and became increasingly concerned about the complex intersecting injustices that women continue to navigate regularly. Their bodies were being battered in so many ways, and still they showed up for class. Around this time, I was invited to join the Dawn Network, Development Alternatives with Women in a New Era. It was a feminist research and advocacy network from the Global South. This network provided the analytical and collegial space to understand these issues globally, but also in the Pacific. It had a huge influence on my analytical framework and experience of global and regional research-based advocacy, and it fueled my inclination for hearty debates. Although we were all committed to Dawn's vision that upholds the voices of the poorest women, we all came from different country contexts: Brazil, South Africa, India, Barbados, Sri Lanka, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, Fiji, Cook Islands. And we had different disciplinary perspectives: post-structuralist feminism, indigenous feminism, radical Marxism, the politics of post-apartheid South Africa, French, Senegalese sociology of fundamentalism, and rural community-based education movements in Latin America. I had huge respect for the lively, challenging, and ultimately rewarding debates and activities, and amongst other things, I was able to develop my thinking around the marked body as part of Dawn's contribution in 2001 to the UN International Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and other related intolerances. This particular image here shows, on the one hand, the part of what I was able to do was to have what we call Dawn Training Institutes. I'm not sure, Nani, whether you were there. Not that one. You went to another one. Yeah. But this was a fabulous opportunity for people who were women in the Pacific who were willing to call themselves feminist of some sort, to come together and learn about the intersecting ways in which a range of economics and politics work together. And this was taken in Lolawata Island in Papua New Guinea. The other images was 2019, just before the lockdown, where we began to talk about intergenerational ways of, Dawn, we called it the Dawn Intergenerational Dialogues, and how we talked about some of those issues around different, over generations. While I was in Papua New Guinea, I started my PhD and had significant periods of time in Hamilton. So here's some more stories about learning through ta and spa and learning through time and space. The University of Waikato offered a non-residential option, and as a mother of 2 and then 3 children, it made a huge difference. I completed 5 years later while living in Lotapa, Samoa, and was very grateful for the friendship of Dr. Asane Tiliki Chantun, who was also completing her PhD at the same time. I'm hugely grateful for the exemplary supervision of Emeritus Professor Dick Bedford, who's here with us today, Professor Robin Longhurst, and the collegiality of many other PhD students at the time, like Professor Linda Johnston. They pushed me to take on those intellectual challenges and, more importantly, to explain them clearly, in writing and verbally. So my PhD dissertation, entitled Maternities in Out-of-the-Way Places, was motivated by the idea that the body was the geography closest in, and this is why I love geography. After my PhD, we moved to Bonn, Germany, the most foreign place I have ever lived, even though my great-grandfather was from Hamburg. Eventually, I got a job at the Office of the African Caribbean Pacific Group of States in Brussels, And it was a fascinating place to work and to learn from 98 multilingual ambassadors from across the Africa, Caribbean and Pacific region. Certainly, I learned a lot about diplomatic debate, and I hope it's come through in the way in which I engage. Stop laughing. I was still writing my PhD when I was invited to join a special workshop in Oregon. Professor Wenda Harcourt, who also worked as a feminist development spaces like me, invited me to join a small workshop which also included Professor Arturo Escobar. And those of us in development studies will know his work very well. He's quite a hero. So I was quite happy to do that. It was a significant turning point for me in moving back to academia. And after that, I took a research fellowship at the Australian National University, working with the inspirational post-structuralist economic geographer, Cathy Gibson. I was still trying to work out ways to bring in a Pacific relational perspective. And it was there that I developed my ongoing and still happening book project on the Pacific feminist ecology of flowers. I love that project, but I do have to finish it at some point. And then I came back to Aotearoa. I began here at the University of Auckland in a 0.25 position for 6 months in development studies. Luckily, I got a fixed term position for 2 years teaching in development studies. Finally, I got that wonderful permanent position. And after that, I spent some 19 years in the graduate-only development studies program, and I'm really grateful to see some of my colleagues here, including Ritesh and Cathy and others. I was 7 years as director of development studies, and when I left, I'm really proud to say, and one of my friends keeps reminding me, development studies globally was ranked 23 in the world. We no longer have a Masters in Development Studies program, but I think the time we did have one was very, very productive of the students. They were exciting times. We had students from Mongolia, and one of my students from Mongolia who did her fieldwork on new land tenure policies on horseback. And when that was too slow, she moved to a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. I had a PhD student who had to paddle a pig, and when we sent him a message, "How are you getting on?" he sent a picture back, and he was paddling a pig carcass downwind of his writing house in Tuvalu. He said, "That's why I couldn't work because of the smell. Then I figured out where it was," and so that's what he'd been doing. I feel hugely privileged to have the opportunity to walk alongside these scholars. But I also remained active in global feminist research and advocacy, mostly through AWID, the Association of Women in Development. And along with the Fiji women's rights movement, every year we managed to raise funds to get up to 30 women to global forums in Bangkok in 2005, in Cape Town in 2008, in Istanbul in 2012, and in Brazil, north of Salvador, in 2016. Ensuring diverse women from the Pacific had a presence in these global forums was a priority. I was lucky to be on the organising committee for the Istanbul Forum, which meant I went to Istanbul 3 times, and this was just before things became really tight there, delivering plenary addresses and co-facilitating workshops and listening. There was a lot of listening. Feminist organisations are wonderful and fabulous, but they included tensions that needed to be resolved. And often these were around race, sexuality, and cultural status, all of which are found in the region. But this global engagement kept me alert to the specificities of gendered social relations in the Pacific, always contending with the legacies of colonial rule, both the obvious and the never so obvious. There are very few places in the region where gendered social relations are unequivocally gender unjust. Aspirations and intentions of gender equality fly in the face of tragic deaths from intimate partner violence, botched abortions, fatal homophobic attacks, and brutal sorcery-related violence, and so on. Compounded by climate change, rapacious resource exploitation, militarisation, and democratic sluggishness, the challenges remain. But this is where we need audacity, but audacity with obligation. My research projects take heart from the analysis that makes clear the dynamic power relations across cultural, social, economic, political and environmental processes and activities. It allows me to better intervene, while it may take time, but I'm fully behind good social science research with an explicit reference to time and space, indigeneity and all that this makes possible. These are some of the research projects that I kind of pulled out that did that. The Madison Mary project was looking at how women who provided really basic healthcare services in the upper reaches of the Sepik River in Papua New Guinea were losing the name Madison Mary and being named volunteers, which was a huge cultural shift in what they were doing. The understanding of peripheral markets and marketing practices in coastal places as diverse as Aitutaki in the Cook Islands, Salialunga in Samoa, Munda in Solomon Islands, and Tuwhi in Papua New Guinea. That was in a project to try and understand the ways in which market vendors were so often silenced. And issues around labour mobility, and here I worked with, and sorry I've got some names there, Basil Putulu I worked with around the Madison Mary project. The Peripheral Markets project was working with Professor Anita Lacey. The Labour Mobility project again with Dick Bedford and my colleague Vijay Naidu. And the most recent one, which was quite excited, which I've co-led with my colleagues, Dr. Roweni Nishu and Dr. Tina Newport around climate mobility in the Pacific, and I do want to acknowledge my colleagues Roy and Grace who've also been very much involved in that, and Sam. So how do we practice gendered audacity with obligation? A lot of it came through this kind of research, but there were other ways to take action on these issues, and so I chose 3 ways of doing this. Oxfam in the Pacific Feminist Fund, and Toksave. How we deliver development, as in Oxfam in the Pacific, how we fund it, and how we learn about it. So choose something. To my colleagues and friends who work tirelessly in these spaces, it's often difficult spaces, but choose. Oxfam in the Pacific, for me, has an unswerving commitment to self-determination and social justice. The Pacific Feminist Fund is looking to making ways of innovative funding for Pacific women, of girls in their all their diversity. And Toksave is a resource where you can go and find research on Pacific gendered research. My contribution to these initiatives, and you can see I'm only one of many working in those spaces, is to provide critical Pacific gender analysis, which means listening and then asking questions about how power operates. And governance, which means ensuring our practices are consistent with our values. These are things I can do from my base in Aotearoa. So please support these organisations. Do what you can through donations, spread the word, or maybe get involved in governance yourself. If you're interested in governance, I'm really happy to talk to you about that. In conclusion, you'll be happy to know, and I'm even more happy, recognising the Melia Effect demanded that I took a more expansive perspective to mainstream climate change. To address this interconnected environmental, social, cultural and economic systems whose impacts on gendered bodies can be so tragic, meant I had to work with different understandings of time. It recognises how our bodies, our emotions and sensations are deeply intertwined, and it highlights the need to understand how knowledge is produced, how it's controlled and influenced. And this means we need to understand complex combinations of the admirable search for education, the complex process of climate change, the greedy practices of plantation agriculture, and the biological process of menstruation. Melia's was a preventable death, and my scholarship and practice has continually been motivated to ensure we better understand, we better communicate, we fight harder, we hold our ground. But we need to provide new ways of thinking that widens our frame away from the immediate tragedy. We need to be bold, This is audacity, but we also need to understand our obligations. So from days growing up in Puriroa with many heartwarming moments in the Cook Island, Niue and Māori, Samoa and Tongan communities in the 1960s and 70s, the visit to Mauke and Mangaia for 3 months as a 10-year-old deeply imprinted on me, and the formative family ties in Wanigala, Oran Province and UPNG. And I stand here now, 3 decades later, or many more decades later, delivering a professorial lecture on navigating the tensions of gender equality. My hope is that over time, as an educator and a researcher, I've been able to show some light on this. Moreover, I hope I've motivated and trained students to attend to these urgencies with the analytical skills and commitment to asking questions, especially questions that challenge dominant structures. Unpick those histories and unpick that political rhetoric. There are many pressing issues. Now, in Pacific Studies at University of Auckland, with a great team poised to go further into the Western Pacific and the North Pacific, the scholarly study of this region I call home is a spacious one. But we need to understand the complexity and diversity in this region of people speaking over 800 languages. Their worldviews will challenge and enrich us. Some of my hopes, that more Pacific people complete their PhDs sooner than I did, that they become professors sooner than I did, that they read those books from cover to cover, and they read the articles from the beginning to the end, and they write sooner than I did. That book is still happening. But that they take their skills further and more widely, and they practice audacity with obligation. A couple of years ago, I wrote a paper entitled The Audacity of the Ocean, inspired partly by friends like Teresia Tiaiwa, Anita Lacey and Uma Kuthari, whose mobility stories from other times and places highlighted our conflicted relation with something we hold on to tightly, the ocean. The ocean is our metaphysical signifier of our importance in our existence, but we also experience its wrath, and we can rightfully say, how dare you? And I say that this evening, how dare we? How dare we? And I hope I've shown some ways that I have dared to be a Pacific feminist, decolonial scholar, and a mother, a sister, an auntie, a niece, a cousin, and a friend. Thank you so much for coming tonight. You didn't have to, but you've been a gracious and attentive audience. Me takamata. Thank you.
Thank you. You can stay here with me. Come stand here with me. Me taki ma'ata whakawelahi, Professor Underhill-Sem, also a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit, obviously following your mama's footsteps, and not to mention a recipient of the Royal Society of New Zealand's 2022 Metch Medal for understanding gender relations in Pacific communities. So she's an absolute star, and we're so blessed to have her here at Waipapa Taumataro. And there's one thing that I do know about Yvonne, and I'm sure some of you, it could probably resonate with you, is that she has a lovely, calming ahua, and she calms me down. But the point is, when it comes to gender and Pacific feminism, we see a fierceness, we see a staunchness, and we see fight. And so thank you for standing in the gap. Thank you for flying the flag, rainbow flag. She does that too. She flies that too. An ally. For flying the flag for both development studies and Pacific studies, and just thank you for gifting us you, and we will always stand with you, So, whawhitei te le lava. Thank you.